coming for such an important event. And I want to let everybody know that this is also a live-streamed event. I want to welcome Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who is the Chair of Future Security and Defense Council, GlobSec. He's also the member of International Consultative Board New Strategy Center. He is also the co-author of the Future War in Defense of Europe. I hope after the questions I will put to Ben, he will still want to sign it. And over a career of 38 years, his operational assignments include service in Iraq and Afghanistan. Last two assignments were Commander, NATO Light Land Command in Izmir, Turkey, 2012 to 2014, and Commanding General, United States Army Europe, 2014 to 2017 in Wiesbaden, Germany. He retired from the US Army in January 2018, and he lives in Germany for the moment, so he's very European. So, Ben, welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
Well, thanks for the privilege. New Strategy Center, I love being associated with the New Strategy Center, always creating opportunities for us to have conversations about the big issues that Romanians care about, that Americans care about, and people in the Black Sea region care about. So I look forward to being interrogated tonight, Paul.
So interrogation was part of my training, but I will try to be nice. So let's start with the warming up question. Since the Cold War, the US defense strategy has been predicated on military forces that were superior in all domains to those of any adversary. But the nature of warfare has evolved, and that superiority is gone. Put another way, US defense strategy and posture have become insolvent. The tasks we expected the military forces and other elements of national power to execute internationally now exceed the means available to accomplish those tasks. Fixing this will require not just more and better weapon system, it will also call for changing the posture of US forces abroad and above all adopting innovative operational concept. Last Friday, when I think you were busy with the interview with Jonathan, there was an event organized by RAND Corporation exactly on this report, which was launched in July, how to reverse the erosion of US and allied military power and influence. So my question, just a warming up question, do we need to be concerned? And if the answer is yes, how much?
So, of course, I disagree with the whole premise or the way you started off with the question. The U.S. was able to put 2 carrier strike groups and an Ohio-class submarine in the region just to convey to the Iranians, do not make a terrible miscalculation that you could escalate this conflict from what Hamas is already doing with Israel. Of course, what we do have is stretched, and the Chinese are watching to see, does the U.S., with all of our European allies, do we have the capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia, help come back to a peaceful situation in Israel, deter Iran, and still have enough left to tell the Chinese, do not make a terrible mistake. They're looking to see that. I think that we do have a lot of work to do, so I'll accept that part of the question. Obviously, our defense industry is not yet on a war footing. I mean, we have not increased production of many things, only artillery ammunition, and that requires political will. The defense industries are not charities. They have thousands of employees. They have very sophisticated supply chains. And so the president has to direct the department, put the money into it if we're serious about doing all these things that we have to do. But I would say that the United States, particularly under this administration, has done a good job of trying to strengthen or repair our relationships inside NATO with allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific region, putting troops back on the ground in Europe. We had definitely gotten way too small. I mean, we only had one armor brigade in all of Europe, which was incredible. So putting troops back on the ground in Europe as for deterrence, where we are short, I think, is on sea power. That the Navy is not big enough to do everything that it's asked to do.
Yeah, and I think your explanation last week in an event in Zurich, I think, which I watched extremely carefully, you explained that those 11 carriers, aircraft carriers, which United States has at the moment, practically you can't have more than 5 at one moment. So you have to be very careful, and you have to, in a way, be aware of how many challenges you can deal with at one moment. And to my defense, the question, practically the introduction, was exactly from the RAND Corporation website, and this was the conversation the people had. To be very frank, once you get into the details of their analysis, including what is happening on the eastern flank, the fact that they are treating as the 2 pillars of the eastern flank, Poland and Romania. And of course, we have to admit there are differences. I mean, Poland is doing more than we are. We have to take a part of our, let's say, part of the problem. But also, I will, and this will help me to launch into the second question, which is about the Black Sea. The fact that in the Black Sea and the Frontier of Freedom from 2004, Ronald Asmus and Bruce Jackson, 2 of the, let's say, best advocates of NATO expansion to the east, including Romania, described the wider Black Sea region as the Bermuda Triangle of Western strategic thinking. Others are calling the Black Sea as inhospitable sea or a geopolitical gray zone. And in your own study, when you were working for SIPA, you have the title, The Black Sea or the Black Hole. So the question is, does the United States, does the West in general know what to do with the Black Sea? Is NATO capable and willing to discharge its treaty obligations for the Black Sea allies the same way as is done for those in the Baltic Sea and other parts in the secure area of responsibility?
I know what to do with the Black Sea, but does my country or does the alliance? Not so sure. As you know, Senator Shaheen and Senator Romney directed or led legislation that would require the U.S. government to finally develop a comprehensive strategy for the Black Sea region that would address not only military, but also economic investment, diplomatic relationships, all the things that you would expect to find in a comprehensive strategy. But it took these 2 senators in a bipartisan way to force even that to happen. And I think not enough people in not only D.C., but also in some Western European capitals fully appreciate the potential as well as the challenges of the Black Sea region. Of course, for so long, it was behind the Iron Curtain. When I was a lieutenant in Germany, I mean, the Black Sea seemed a million miles away when I was in West Germany back in the 80s. Obviously, I can clearly see now that the Black Sea is this economic corridor between Europe and Eurasia. The Caucasus could be that portal that really could open up economic development. But that would require us to improve our relationship with our Turkish ally. Right now, Turkey does not trust the United States or anybody in the West, and frankly, not many people in our Western European or in Washington, D.C. trust Turkey. So we'd have to fix that relationship as part of a strategy. I think one of the reasons that your question is so important, Paul, you asked, are we ready to carry out our NATO Washington Treaty obligations for allies that are here? Absolutely. There are thousands of American soldiers that are in Romania around the clock. Now, I disagree with the decision for the U.S. and other countries to pull the Navy out of the Black Sea. Now, Turkey has used their position with the authority of the Montreux Convention to, fortunately, stop Russia from bringing up any more ships into the Black Sea. That was a very important decision, but they have asked us not to ask permission to bring in U.S. Navy or Royal Navy or others. So because of that, the Russians, what they do have in the Black Sea are, I'm not going to say they're unchallenged. The Ukrainians have made them pay a huge price. In fact, they're even having to leave Sevastopol because of what the Ukrainians are doing to them, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. So it would still, I would prefer that we had our own ships in the Black Sea working to enforce freedom of navigation, but for now, we're not able to do that. But my Romanian friends should not be concerned that the U.S. won't do what is required if Romania ever is attacked. Not only do we have U.S. troops here, French troops here, other allies will be here. NATO's Black Sea air policing continues, and there will be plenty of help coming here.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you. And of course, my questions are a bit provocative because
I prefer that.
I know you are very good in asking very provocative questions. And to be very frank, when I heard your comments in Zurich last week, especially about Turkey and about how the U.S. policy was, let's say, designed, Turkey being the responsibility of two U.S. command, the EUCOM, European Command, and the Central Command. And the Central Command had the upper hand, and some decisions were taken. I'm not going to go there. But I think it was one of the most frank and open, let's say, description from a U.S. former official. In this respect, I think what our first, let's say, conversation was about innovative approach. I think what the Ukrainians were showing us is that we also we need to have an innovative approach when it comes to projecting power and defending our interests, because in the Black Sea is not only about having ships, as the Ukrainian managed to show everybody, was exactly as you mentioned, not having a real navy. You're able to put the Russian Black Sea fleet in a very awkward position, and also to force them to leave Crimea, which I think is a huge success. At the same time, do we need here at the Black Sea to have a different approach? Because everybody understood, okay, we have a battle group like everybody else had from 2016. Everybody was happy. This was the strategic signal from the NATO leadership, from United States and the West, that Black Sea is taken seriously. But do we have to adapt to the realities of the Black Sea, having the right set of capabilities? And in this respect, there was a very interesting study from Hudson Institute at the beginning of this year by two very good gentlemen, very capable. And there was a proposal there. They came with a proposal that Romania is in the best position to have a NATO hub, A to AD, with all the capabilities to defend against any Russian risks and threats, including drones, air, naval, submarine drones, because building those big platforms, corvettes, frigates, takes time, takes resources, and We don't have the time.
So I have watched Romania now for several years, both from serving with Romanian soldiers who were in Zabul when I was in Afghanistan, and then up through when I was at Izmir and then Wiesbaden, and 6 years since then. And I have always been impressed with the quality of soldiers and officers I meet, the leadership, to include General Petrescu now, but General Truca before him. I mean, I've always been impressed. But what has frustrated me is that Romanians seem reluctant to step forward and accept responsibility. I can remember being in a meeting with senior Romanian officials, and the SACEUR was with me, and was like, why don't you guys, in the Black Sea, this is before 2020, before last year, obviously, it was back in probably 2000, well, it doesn't matter. It was after the Russians had invaded Crimea in 2014, but before the large-scale invasion. I said, why don't you get together with Bulgaria or get out there in the Black Sea and challenge what you know, help enforce freedom of navigation? And the answer was, not without Turkey. So Romania, which is in the right place, but was deferring to Turkey. And Turkey only has almost no naval presence in the Black Sea, except in Trabzon. It's a maintenance. So the Turks are much more interested in their watching their Greek allies than they are rocking the boat, literally, in the Black Sea. I have encouraged Romania to be the drone center of excellence. I mean, it's the best place where you could offer everybody that makes drones or wants to practice with them or how to defend against them. This is the perfect place. No interest. I remember speaking to Romanian Navy officers. Now, I'm going down the list of things where, yes, Romania is the right place geographically, but you have to step forward and accept responsibility. Do it. Do something, not sit and wait for somebody else to do it. This is the center of gravity for the United States in the Black Sea region, here. It should be Turkey, but it's here because Turkey has, again, their attention is focused more to the south, understandably. I remember speaking to very senior Romanian naval officers about how the U.S. Navy was beginning to transition to more and more maritime drones. I was like, no way. I mean, and the attitude was they're not tested enough, and it was almost like they couldn't imagine ships without sailors. And so if Romania is going to live up to its potential, people have to be willing to take some risk, be innovative the way the Ukrainians are. Ukraine has demonstrated that you don't have to have big, expensive ships to protect your water in the Black Sea. I think for the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, using drones, and I know this is bad news for sailors, they want ships, but I think that the future in terms of capability, cost, effectiveness, you need a mix of ships with sailors to do things, obviously, but you can do a lot better with anti-submarine. You can detect mines. There's so much that you can do. And again, the Ukrainians have demonstrated that the Black Sea Fleet has a really cool sounding name, but they're not that good. And now they're having to leave Sevastopol after Ukraine used three Storm Shadows, destroyed the dry dock and got a submarine and a logistics ship as a bonus, and then put a giant hole in the roof of the headquarters, which, by the way, there was a lot of stories that, well, they might have gotten rid of the commander of the Black Sea Fleet. I promise you, even if that's true, that means nothing. Admirals and generals can be replaced very easily. The 30 staff officers that were killed or wounded, that is much more damaging to the Black Sea Fleet to lose all those young staff officers. So I guess the point is, and you got me fired up, Paul, this is so important, and Romania is a fantastic ally, but it has to be willing to do more. But the U.S. has to demonstrate that it is here and that we're going to help work with all of our allies and partners in the Black Sea region It can't be Romania by itself, Bulgaria by itself, Turkey by itself.
Yeah, fully agree with you. Now I would like to have your comment a bit about Bakhmut, which was seen as a symbol of the Ukrainian resistance. And at the beginning of the counteroffensive operation, Bakhmut was intended to fix the Russian troops in the area to stop them from being sent as reinforcement to the south. But still we were able to see that the best Ukrainian brigades, the most, let's say, professional, experienced, were sent to Bakhmut and not to the south, which was the main effort. To the south were sent the brigades which were formed and trained in the west, untested in battle. It was a bit of a question mark why it happened. Also, a lot of conversation were about the training in the west, mostly, that was not up to the realities of the Ukrainian battlefield. And after this introduction, I will go to what General Zaluzhny mentioned in the recent article, and I know that you commented on Jonathan's podcast about his article. General Zaluzhny is saying that a positional war is a prolonged one that carries enormous risk to Ukraine's armed forces and its state. If Ukraine is to escape from that trap, we need all these things: air superiority, much improved electronic warfare, counter-battery capabilities, new mine-breaching technology, and the ability to mobilize and train more reserves. So, how would you comment on all these things? Were things which were missed? What should we do to help Ukraine continue the fighting, and not only that, but also win?
So the most important thing that the West can do is to say it is our policy that Ukraine wins this war. Not this BS, we're with you for as long as it takes. What an empty, meaningless statement. The United States, Germany, UK, France, Romania, everybody should say it's our policy that Ukraine wins. And we're going to do everything they need to make sure they win. And then there's no more excuses about how long it takes to train an F-16 pilot, or how much gas an Abrams tank burns, or all these other nonsense excuses that were given over the last 20 months about why we are making decisions so slow and still have not committed to providing the 300-kilometer range ATACMS, the one that would absolutely devastate Russian forces on Crimea. This is very frustrating, and I don't understand why my president, who has done so much good on so many other aspects of this, is not able or willing to say we want Ukraine to win. Instead, you hear we want to help them not lose, we want them to be in a good negotiating position, and I think not only is this the wrong approach, it is a missed opportunity. We could be changing security in Europe for generations if Ukraine is able to defeat Russia, eject them back to the 1991 borders. I think it's still going to happen. It's just going to take longer than it should, because we are not providing those things that are necessary. And the counteroffensive, look, General Zaluzhny is one of the finest officers I have ever listened to, observed. The guy is very good. And when I saw his comments in The Economist, of course, some people picked up on this stalemate and like, aha, see, even Zaluzhny says it's a stalemate. I think actually what he did, he gave a very professional, clear, sober assessment of the situation as it is, and described how they get out of this deadlock, which is the actual translation of the Ukrainian word. It was not stalemate, it was a deadlock, which is a different connotation. And he laid out what's needed to get out of that deadlock. Now think about this. Russia invaded Ukraine 9 years ago, 2014. After 9 years, with every advantage, Russia still only controls 19 or 18% of Ukraine. That's it. Their Black Sea Fleet is in retreat. The great Russian Air Force has not destroyed a single train or convoy bringing equipment and ammunition from Poland or Romania into Ukraine. Not one. So not only did this Air Force, which has hundreds of very expensive aircraft, they failed job one, which is to establish air superiority. Then they failed job two, which is to cut off your opponent's line of communication. They can't do either of those, and the Black Sea Fleet can't even control the Western Black Sea against an opponent that has no navy. And now Russia, President Putin, who wants to be Vladimir the Great, had to fly 11 time zones to ask North Korea for artillery ammunition that is my age. I am not impressed. And then today, I'm reading that the Russians are turning to all their former customers, the Pakistanis, the Egyptians, and others who have bought Russian equipment, saying, can we have some of those helicopter engines? Because sanctions are killing us. So the great Russian defense industry is having to go back and ask for parts from nations to whom they have sold equipment in the past. So, yes, the ground part of the counteroffensive is going slow. Yes, it's taking longer than it should. But I think when I hear somebody talk about Ukrainian fatigue, nobody in this room or that's listening should have Ukraine fatigue, because none of us have been in Ukraine getting shot at. They're the only people allowed to be tired are people that are actually fighting or their families. So we need to quit sniveling. We need to get organized and recognize that we have to help Ukraine defeat Russia. We have to make that our policy, and then we give the things that they need. The counteroffensive is not just tracks and tanks and infantry moving through trench lines and minefields. The Ukrainians are doing what we call in NATO multi-domain operations. This is where you integrate the effects of land, sea, air, space, and cyber into one operation to achieve the effect you're after. Of course, the decisive terrain of this war is Crimea. And so this whole counteroffensive is intended to liberate Crimea. Ukraine knows they'll never be safe or secure as long as Russia sits in Crimea. They'll never be able to rebuild their economy as long as Russia can block all 5 of their main seaports. Even after Berdyansk and Mariupol are liberated, they still can't get in and out of Azov Sea because of the Russians sitting there in Crimea with that big stinking bridge. So they're not going to stop. And shame on any of us who are saying, oh, come on, let them, for the sake of peace, let the Russians have Crimea. Whoever says that has never looked at a map or read a history book. I mean, would you say, come on, Romania, I mean, for the sake of peace, let the Russians go ahead and have Constanta? I mean, they used to control it anyway. You wouldn't, nobody here would agree to that. Why would we ask Ukraine to come on, let them have Crimea?
I think your let's say...
I'm going to need a really big drink after this.
Yeah, we can fix that. It's just helping me with my last question before we start getting questions from the audience. And this is, are we learning the right lesson from the high-intensity war in Ukraine, where significant losses require a strong, well-trained and equipped reserve, almost equal in number and capabilities to the active armed forces? Do the people of the NATO countries have the moral strength to defend their homeland in a high-intensity war as the Ukrainians are doing that? What is your view on that?
That is a terrific question. This is where our leaders have to speak to us as if we are adults. Don't talk to us like we're children. Don't give us political mumbo-jumbo. Talk to us like we are adults. Speak plainly about what is at stake, why it is essential that we invest in defense if we want to prevent a conflict. We know from 5,000 years of history that appeasement or being unprepared invites aggression, not prevents it, it invites it. I mean, everybody in this room, if you're here tonight, you probably are already a little bit of a history nerd, so you already know this. Appeasement and weakness invites aggression, especially if you live next door to Russia, like you do here in Romania. not being prepared is something that will end up with Romanians suffering at the hands of Russia. So I believe this war that we're dealing with right now, that Ukraine is under attack from Russia, is the result of failed deterrence. Failed deterrence. We did nothing after they invaded Georgia in 2008. We did nothing after they jumped over the Obama red line in Syria and helped the Assad regime kill thousands of their own people, use chemical weapons, and that put a couple of million refugees on the road into Turkey and then into Europe. That was not an accident. That was an intentional outcome for the Russians, because that weaponization of refugees put enormous pressure on the cohesion of Europe and inside the European Union. And then we really did nothing after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. I mean, this Minsk process, what a total joke that was. And Russia was pretty confident, February last year, that we would continue this process of doing nothing. And the U.S., we were a mess. We had, for the first time in my life, we did not have a smooth transition of power. And then this catastrophe of January the 6th and the way we came out of Afghanistan, I'm pretty sure the Russians were thinking, all right, the Americans are not going to do anything. Germany was still building Nord Stream 2 late into 2021. And President Macron said we were all brain dead. So this is why cohesion, readiness, demonstrating capability is so important to prevent a conflict. All these things that Russia did that I just mentioned happened after the last American tank went home and after we started disassembling our aviation brigade.
Yeah, fully agree with you. And before we start questioning, I just want to share with you and the people in the audience the story of the late Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, when he stopped in Ottopen. I think he was coming from Afghanistan, and he had 2 hours briefing from my colleagues from the Romanian Defense Intelligence about what was happening in the Black Sea. This was 2005. And he immediately invited my colleagues to Washington, D.C., and he said, you have to brief my colleagues in the Pentagon and the other parts of the government, because we really don't have attention, resources, time to deal with the Russians. It was 2005. And he realized that, yes, unfortunately, almost everybody in the West were losing their attention, their span of attention on what Russia was doing even at that time, before Georgia. I mean, I think that what Poland and Romania were doing in all those years, trying to build the understanding of what was happening. And unfortunately, we didn't manage. People were too busy with Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sorry to say that. And now I want to start with questions from the audience. So who would like to have the first question? If not, I already have one from online, please. The microphone here.
General, my name is Ion Ioniță. General, my question is, do you see any connection between the war in Ukraine and what is happening in this new war in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you. I absolutely believe that the attack by Hamas on Israel was not a coincidence, that this happened explicitly because of the relationship between Iran and Russia. I mean, they have been cooperating with each other for years. I don't think there's a piece of paper where signed by Putin saying, "Dear Ayatollah, please have Hamas attack on the 7th of October." But clearly, the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, is the biggest beneficiary of this war in Israel because it has distracted attention. You have a hard time finding anything about Ukraine on any newspaper now. The U.S., even with our new Speaker of the House, unfortunately said, Ukraine's not as urgent as Israel, and so some resources are going there. So I think that this was done for the benefit of the Kremlin. And interestingly, Hezbollah, you know, they're staying out of it. I mean, they're launching some rockets and artillery and stuff into northern Israel, but Hezbollah has no intention, I don't think, right now to get into it because they can see that the Israelis are, I mean, fully mobilized. Everybody's ready. They have a little blood in their mouth, and Hezbollah would gain nothing, but they would lose a lot. So I think this was, Hamas is being used to create additional stress, pressures, and also what they've done, the way that they did their attack was so horrible that they knew the Israelis would overreact in a devastating. Every person in Hamas needs to be killed and burn in hell forever, but the Israelis should have the strategic outcome described by the Israeli government should not be destroy Hamas. The strategic outcome for Israel has to be we need a peaceful coexistence with our Arab neighbors. How do we do that? And of course, the way they're going about destroying Gaza City and so many innocent people are getting killed, it will be very difficult for the Arab neighbors that don't like Hamas, that don't like Palestinians, and don't like Iran. It will still be very difficult for them to, at least now, work with Israel. And so I think the way the Israelis are going about this, from a strategic standpoint, no matter how angry they are, and no matter how horrible Hamas is, I don't know that this is going to help in the long term.
And just to add to what you mentioned is the piece of news which I've seen some weeks ago when the two carriers, task forces, were deployed in the East Mediterranean. There were mentions of the anti-ship cruise missiles which Hezbollah has from Syria. They are the Russian P-800 Onyx, which the export version is called Yakkon, and seems to be quite capable. So it seems the Syrian, no one was able to show me the evidence that the Russians were informed, but my guess is that they know exactly what is happening with the weapons they provide to the Syrians.
Yeah, of course they do, and you're exactly right, Paul. And of course, Wagner still exists, by the way. It's there in Syria, and they are handing over Pantsir air defense weapons to Hezbollah. So the Russians, they never left Syria. I mean, they still have their base there in Tartus, and so they're doing everything they can to create as many different stressors on us as possible. That's us, the West, not just the United States. That's us, the West. The fact that there are two carrier strike groups, which is, and one of those was headed home, so they stopped it, kept it there longer because we needed the aircraft from two carriers to protect them against Iranian anti-ship missiles. To have a 24/7 air cap to protect carriers, it requires a lot of airplanes. And so they're there for a reason, and obviously the threat is real. But it seems to me that the U.S. reacted so quickly and so strongly that the Iranians, for now, I think they're satisfied with what they have accomplished.
Yeah, and I understand that one of the task force will be moved to the Gulf, where it's on the way there. Yeah. So, which I think is a good posture. So, more questions from the audience?
Yes.
Please.
Yes. Does this work? Yes, it works. My name is Anna Harrison. I'm a journalist and I work with Radio France International in the Bucharest office. Thank you for answering the question about Hamas and Russia. Everybody was thinking the same thing. It's too much of a coincidence. But I'm also thinking if, let's say, Vladimir Putin needed Hamas to attack Israel, and they did it so bad to make sure that Israel would retaliate, aren't they stupid? I mean, if they get destroyed, what would they... I mean, this is what I don't understand. Because Israel is striking back so heavily and destroying Hamas. Didn't they think that they will, like, perish, all of them, if they say yes to let's create a second front. This is what I'm trying to understand.
You're asking, does Hamas, did they realize that they were going to provoke such a response that it would lead to their own destruction?
Yes.
Well, that's a fair question. I think they probably were assuming that the U.S. and others would be able to restrain Israel more than we've been able to do so far. Maybe that was an assumption. But also, nobody's going to confuse Hamas with a great military force and with great military leaders. I mean, their leaders, for the most part, are not even in Gaza. You know, they're in Qatar and not suffering along with the Palestinians who are there. Hamas is not well liked. I was reading today about polls that were taken before October the 7th, and most Palestinians actually don't like Hamas. So I can't claim to be an expert on the dynamics, you know, their thinking, their strategy, but I think, you know, for them, I mean, this is like jihad. It's a terrorist organization, and terrorist organizations, people are frequently willing to kill themselves when their task is to not destroy Israel, but to kill as many Jews as they can. That's what they're trying to do.
Thank you.
And I think that, just to complete that, I still remember the moment when Hamas won the elections in the Gaza Strip, and some diplomats from European Western countries start visiting these people. And their explanation was, well, we are not meeting terrorist representative. We are just meeting people which been elected. So I think there is some kind of responsibility which should be shared by a lot of people. All this tolerance, all this mixture of messages about the let's say, the rightful rights of the Palestinian people to have a normal life. And the fact that Hamas was left, which, let's say, having a free reign for so long. And I think, just building on what the lady was asking, is the one very strange thing, the fact that the behavior on the 7th of October was having so many Daesh treats. I mean, that kind of violence against innocent people was unprecedented, I think. So,
But I guess that they changed bosses. Some people from Daesh went without a job and they went to the next terrorist organization. This is what I think that they must have done. And Hamas, as far as I know, not win the election there.
Yeah, I don't.
And those thugs and gunmen to make sure they would win the elections. It was not a fair election. I don't remember that to be a fair election. We keep saying that, and that legitimized them, but I don't remember that.
I think somebody else legitimized them before, a long time ago.
I don't know.
Yeah. More questions, please.
My name is Adrian Maniuțiu. General, you mentioned deterrence, which proves so effective now in the Eastern Mediterranean. But going back to Russia, you mentioned Georgia, which is correct. You mentioned the Obama line in Syria, which is correct. Crimea, and now the extended war in Ukraine. But the question is, what could or should have been done differently? Because we are also discussing about learning lessons from the past. So what could or should have been done differently? And especially Romania. We as Romanians, we as a country, what could the government or the leaders could have done differently so that deterrence comes into action? Because it really proves an effective weapon. And we are now just picking up the fruits of being not active.
So from a Romanian side, clearly the effort that I have watched over the last few years in terms of modernization, improving training and education, developing infrastructure for the military, that's all moving in the right direction. So I think that is correct. What Romania has not done adequately, I think, is in terms of the use of drones, maritime drones that I mentioned. I think this is an area that needs more attention. But also the infrastructure for transportation inside Romania. I'm going to tell you, as a person who loves Romania, and I think this is at least probably my 25th visit, it's the worst transportation infrastructure in Europe, which is really unfortunate for such an important country with so much potential. You've got this great seaport, but you know the road and rail and river transport is not fully developed to the extent that it could be. And I think if you want to increase economic investment, you improve the infrastructure. In the U.S., we finally are spending hundreds of billions of dollars now fixing, repairing, improving transportation infrastructure, and it's helping business all over the place. But from a military standpoint, for U.S., French, other NATO forces to get here fast enough to send a message to the Russians, do not make a mistake and attack Romania, it is very, very difficult to get here fast enough. And so I think improving the military mobility to be able to move around inside Romania and to get into Romania by road and rail is something that has to be done better. Now, for the United States, clearly we've talked about the need for a strategy already. We should have done that years ago, where we looked at the region, the Black Sea region as a whole, and not with each country. We talk about Ukraine as if it's an island, or Georgia like it's an island instead of part of a region, and encouraging our allies and friends in the region to work together. You know, right now, everybody in Congress can correctly identify Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania on the map, because those three countries are on the hill all the time, banging on doors and getting attention, and now everybody in the U.S. knows where the Baltics are. I doubt that every member of Congress could correctly identify every country around the Black Sea. And I think the nations of the Black Sea have to work together more collaboratively in Washington, in Brussels, not separately.
Yeah.
I would be in favor of having a permanent base at MK, make it a permanent base, for example, at Măgălniceanu, or at the, you know, where the Air Force, our Air Force, thanks to Romanian Air Force, allows us to operate out of Câmpia Turzii. Or if of course, with Montreux, we could not have a permanent Navy presence, but look, before February last year, we never came close to using the available days we could have had in the Black Sea, because the Navy in Europe is so small, the U.S. Navy, and the priority of the Black Sea was not high enough to get them there. So we probably used about half of the days we could have with U.S. Navy presence in the Black Sea, even within Montreux. So getting the Black Sea as a higher priority for U.S. European Command, as well as getting more Navy resources, but you know, we're never going to have enough. So that's where not only the littoral states, but also other allies, the Royal Navy, the Dutch Navy, the German Navy, the French, others have got to see the need for more maritime presence. I would love to have a brigade with a brigade headquarters that lived in MK. I mean, do all the things, have that kind of permanent presence, but they need to have training area where they can, like, at the same quality as Grafenwehr, where they can maintain the level of readiness, not just be a garrison. And they would have to have the ability to move rapidly, you know, to Focșani or down to the border or all over Romania, integrated into Romanian defense forces.
Yeah, fully agree. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, when General Cavoli, the commander of US forces in Europe, was in the Congress this spring, I was listening very carefully, almost 3 hours in the House of Representatives and 3 hours in the Senate, the commissions there. And I think that 80% of the conversation and the questions from the members of the Congress were about the Baltic Sea, the High North. Maybe 20% were about the Black Sea. So I'm sure that we have to do more. And I'm sure that everybody here present is aware of the achievement of New Strategy Center with EDAM from Turkey, think tank, and Sofia Security Forum. On Monday, they presented the joint report about how much NATO is needed in the Black Sea, which I think is quite a good step in the right direction. So more questions, please.
General.
Please.
Remus Bondor. Sir, you've mentioned the deadlock, that it's the correct translation from Ukrainian of what General Zaluzhin said. It's about something that changed in the way we fight the war in the land domain due to the use of drones, due to the use of complex ISR systems, and due to the lack of air superiority on both sides?
I think you are correct that even though the counteroffensive is multi-domain, we still want to see the land domain, the ground assault, be more effective. And I think this is what General Zaluzhin was trying to tell everybody. He said, look, from a technological standpoint, the Russians, with all of their problems and shortcomings and failures, they have gotten much better at filling the sky with drones. They also have the system behind the drones. It's not just the platforms, but the system, so that the drones are modernized, updated, able to be replaced, and it's too much for the Ukrainians to be able to knock them all down. And so he's asking for help. How can you reduce the effectiveness of Russian drones? You can't shoot them all down. So looking for non-kinetic means to break the link or to degrade the effectiveness of Russian drones. Now, there's probably a lot of different solutions that are out there, not only using electronic warfare means, but also finding the source, being able to strike, the place from which these things are being launched, being able to cut that off. To get through these minefields, I think the Ukrainians correctly adjusted their tactic to going after headquarters, artillery, and logistics, rather than just fighting their way through the minefields all the time. Continue to go after that which makes Russian mass effective, headquarters, logistics, and artillery, which means they need long-range precision weapons. Now, fortunately, the Russians are willing to sacrifice hundreds of soldiers every day like they're doing around Avdiivka. And so that's part of it, to try and bleed their resources, but that's not going to win the conflict. What's going to win the conflict is liberating Crimea. And so I think the Ukrainians have got to figure out a way to still get through and to sever the land bridge, either with fire or by physically being on it, in order to isolate Crimea.
Yeah, please.
Sir, Brigadier General Dobokan. Sir, you mentioned that the Russian war doesn't go the way they planned initially, because you mentioned their Air Force is not doing the right things, or they do not have the air superiority, and so on and so forth. So we all know that warfare is policy by other means. Knowing some Russian history, do you think the Russians will move their political push toward some other areas? We have the circle of instability, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, as well as if you look at the movements in Africa. So my question is toward possible evolution of the battlefield. Do you see Russia moving into Africa, and from Africa influencing the tolerance of European for Ukraine conflict and, you know, the distraction, so to speak?
I think that's a very good observation, that the Russians are going to fill the vacuum in Africa that is there. And of course, they're not concerned about improving quality of life or human rights or anything in Africa. What they're interested in is causing as many problems, extracting wealth and causing problems for the West by generating more refugees that head to Europe. That they, like I said earlier, they've never left Syria. But I think it's hard to find a bright light on the horizon for Russia right now. I mean, if you think about what's going good for them, I don't see them having any hope of achieving their original reason for going into Ukraine. I mean, I've already gone down the list of things where I think they have come up short. Yes, of course, they have a population advantage. They have endless natural resources. But if the West is properly organized, and if we're committed to not only helping Ukraine win, but also tightening up the sanctions and using diplomatic power, the combined diplomatic power of all the nations of the European Union and NATO, to make sure that Pakistan or Egypt or these other countries that Russia is now asking for help for parts and ammunition, to stop that from happening. So this requires a comprehensive, organized diplomatic effort and economic effort, not just, you know, hey, do you have ammunition we can give to Ukraine? So I think this is the burden for the American president to provide that leadership, but it requires all of our allies agreeing that this is what needs to be done. Now, of course, the Russians have a calendar. They know that we have an election year next year, and they know that the former president is actually going to be a real challenge. You all would have seen polls that came out the other day. I would tell everybody, don't get too worried just yet. You know, in U.S. politics, a lot can happen in a year. A lot is going to happen in a year. The former president was in court yesterday. He's got 91 indictments. I mean, I don't think Houdini could escape 91 indictments. We'll see. And unfortunately, there are millions of Americans that would still vote for him, even if he's in jail. But I think that over the coming year, things are going to be in a different sort of place in the United States. The president, yeah, of course, the current president comes across as old. The guy is smart. I mean, he's been doing this for a long time. And I think we're going to be in a much better place 6, 8, 10 months from now. And the Russians' only hope, their only hope is that Trump comes back as president, or that somebody like Trump that doesn't care about Europe or doesn't care about NATO. So they're hanging on there as long as they can. And that to me, that's not a, that's why I say I don't see many bright lights on their horizon, like they're getting ready to break through somewhere. There is nobody to break through with. They don't have, you know, Siberian divisions that are waiting in the forest, waiting to exploit. They're not there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And with this, on this positive note, I want to thank you very much to General Ben Hodges for the excellent answers to the questions, to thank everybody for being here, and being interested, and I think we achieve a lot today. Thank you very much.
George is buying beer for everybody.